Oh, so hello, Robin from Tuqtuquilal in Guatemala. How are you doing today?
Doing lovely. How are you?
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on to this conversation. I just wanted to give some context to kind of something I've been noticing that's happening in the global spaces with Indigenous wisdom and Indigenous knowledge that's becoming more available to us in the West. Which is wonderful on one hand, but I have noticed that there is a tendency to romanticize or over glorify anything with the word indigenous in front of it. And there are two topics that I would love to hear your thoughts on. And the one under this category of romanticizing indigenous people is that we might feel that it's all lovely and rainbows and unicorns working on a cacao farm and growing cacao fruits and harvesting cacao and drinking cacao all day as Indigenous people. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that. And then the other one is that often we can put people on pedestals when we start to romanticize a culture, and then we disappointed when we are exposed to them just being human and having a mood or being reactive or not being as wise as we thought they were. So, yeah, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, big questions, but Guatemala is such a special place because it has indigenous cultures that are truly alive still. And I think like that for me is what's like really called me to Guatemala. My experience like started more so in like indigenous communities, but I didn't really know much about like any of the spirituality aspects. I sort of just started to come into it interested in the language because I was just learning Spanish, and then all of a sudden now like I'm hearing Quechiquel and I'm like, okay, what is going on here? And like the beautiful way that they dress, like all the different colors and those pieces. And I think there's so much about the Mayan culture that still exists today, and that's really amazing. I think that's like to be celebrated and to be held with such great sacred space, because I think it's so important in this world that we are connecting more with cultures. We are respecting more indigenous cultures, because I think that's what's really been missing since colonization. And so I think like the main piece that I think really to come out of this space that we're in right now is to just find such respect for these cultures that have been um, oppressed for a very long time now. And I think like specifically I can speak to like what I've seen, what I've observed here in Guatemala is a um, very difficult thing in which the colonization came in many different ways, mainly through the church. And so I think while people still to this day still speak their language in many areas, but in many areas they don't anymore. But where in the areas where they still speak their language, while they're still working with the land, while they're still in many places still respecting the spirituality and practicing it, um, there's still it's still a very small percentage of the population, the Mayan population, that is still practicing like the spiritual and like ancestral ways of Mayan culture. And then there's this other level of Mayan culture that's like the people that have been here for thousands of years, learning with the earth, living with the earth, planting their corn every year, because that is like the central piece of the Mayan culture is like the corn. They are the people of the corn, children. So, um, and so like that is their spirituality, that is their culture. And I think there's a lot of different things like that go along with just living in nature and respecting the different plants. Eating, I think a big part of the culture is also the food. So what do they eat? Because it does kind of revolve around corn and as well cacao and these other pieces. Copal as well is like a sacred, they're all sacred things for the Mayan culture. Um, and so I think if you look at the culture from that way, you really see the people that are still very much connected with their spirituality and their culture. And on the other level, they're living in a globalized society that has continually um, brought them yeah, they've continually been oppressed for at least the last 500 years and through colonization. And so I think taking that into consideration, that like as an oppressed people, their cultural manners, their mannerisms have been oppressed as well. Like they have a colonized mindset, unfortunately, as
Mm,
well. And so um, that's so important to really understand that when going into like indigenous cultures, especially the, again, I'm mainly speaking about the Mayan cultures that I've experienced here. um, you know, it's so like learning things that from my colonized mind where I grew up, kind of opening up my mindset to be like, oh, these idioms that they talk about, like
mm,
going out and like, making sure you're covered and like you don't, you're not going to get a cold, or like having babies with a head, like different little things that you start to be like, oh, those are like superstitions. But then you're like, oh wait, no, actually, like that comes from like the ancient Mayan
mm,
like ways of living with the earth and understanding the elements, and
mm,
understanding that if you go out in the cold, from when if you're wet and you go out in the cold, then you're gonna get sick, like these kind of things. That's like it's in the everyday kind of idioms that it's there, this wisdom. But it's also about recognizing, okay, what comes from the wisdom, and then what comes from a colonized attitude or colonized mannerisms in which they've been told that their words don't matter, that what they've been
mm,
told that their traditions don't, or are dangerous. There's
mm,
still spiritual leaders that have been killed recently because
mm,
they've been out there trying to do this. So it's while the people themselves, they light candles in the church, to light candles in a Mayan ceremony, still for the Mayan people, it's dangerous for them. It's they are living in a mindset that to share the wisdom, to intake the wisdom of the Mayan spirituality is dangerous. But in their daily culture and their daily lives, they invoke
mm,
it. They
mm,
they do burn the copal, they do they plant corn, they live by corn. So like their culture is there, their wisdom is there with how to work with the earth. And then at the same time, in the 80s here in Guatemala was when there was this in the 70s and 80s was when industry started to come into Guatemala. And so then we saw the change in which the cement companies came in and they said, no, you can't build with adobe, it's dangerous, you must build with cement. Then we saw the influx of the agriculture industry that came in, and it was like, no, you can't plant your corn naturally. You can't plant vegetables naturally, or your milpa in this way that you've been doing it for generations and generations, your entire like existence. You must use
mm,
chemicals. You must use these improved seeds. You must
mm,
use these. You must use these. And so this mentality change is the piece that I feel is the most dangerous for the Mayan
mm,
culture, of respect of the Mayan culture. And so um, for me, I see this like, and not just industry. I think it started with the church. unfortunately. The church was the one that came in, and the church was what colonized Guatemala. The pastors were the ones that came in, and they went into the indigenous communities, and they started to learn the indigenous languages, and they started to um, turn their sacred Popol Vuh, their sacred Bible, in a way, to something religious through the church, into this good and evil. And so this like change of the morals of good and evil, whereas in the Mayan spirituality and the Mayan cosmovision, there's the underworld, and it's not bad, but you need to go to the underworld to come up and to find your spirituality. So um, it's the change of mindset, mainly from the church and the industries and colonialization, that um, has really dirtied the waters completely
Mm,
of the people that still live here
yeah,
and still represent the culture. So,
yeah.
um, yeah, it was like a long-winded way of
No,
saying
that's a,
the
it's
kids.
so it's so good to have context before getting into any other detail,
Mm,
to understand where, for example, our cacao comes from and the context of the people and the land over just the recent history, and why we might be met with certain challenges when working with Indigenous people. So you mentioned the mindset shift that will take some time from the Indigenous Maya. What about the mindset shift of the West when we tend to, I'm speaking here in a big generalization, but when we tend to romanticize the indigenous Maya for holding incredible wisdom and everybody being, in a sense, spiritually perfect and evolved. There's obviously a history to how this notion came about, but can you speak a little bit to that?
yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think, um, yeah, like I said, there's like the two kind, they're still quite separate a bit at this point in the daily like Mayan cultures of like what is the Mayan spirituality and what is like the general Mayan people culture day to day. Like you
Mm,
show up in Guatemala and you assume somebody, and I don't want to assume this of like Western people to coming to Guatemala, but like you, in a way, like we see like, oh, they're in their Mayan, they're in their traditional wear. They still wear it every day. It's absolutely beautiful, and the threads are still part of their spirituality too. Uh, they speak the language. They must have wisdom um,
mm,
of how to what their spirituality comes from. And the more I get to know the Mayan people, I recognize that they're so separated from their own spirituality in that way. So of course, yeah, people are very much human. I think also there's this fear around like within the Mayan cultures of this. Mm, there's like the Mayan spirituality. There's this tendency to also have this what they call black magic,
mm,
in a way. And there's people that will abuse that power, that will abuse
mm,
their power. And I think that's been shown in so many indigenous cultures. I mean, I think India also is like, but speaking from here in Guatemala, like the people themselves are afraid of the people that work with black magic. And so that
mm,
automatically, like, and a lot of it comes from the church as well, this fear.
mm,
But like, there's many spiritual leaders that have such great reverence for the cosmovision and their spirituality and treat with the
mm,
utmost respect of the greatest good for what they're doing, and that's so special to hold. And we're in such a special time in which those people, like we're in this era from the change of the calendar in 2012, in which
mm,
um, we're in a space now in which these indigenous teachings are being shared
mm,
around the world.
mm.
But it's still very recent. That's only,
Yeah, yeah.
12 years ago,
Mm,
that like the cultures are there. And there's still this existence and the fear that like if I
mm,
share the wisdom,
mm,
I'm gonna get killed, and
mm,
if that's shared, so there's, or not just killed, but it will be corrupted by,
mm,
there
mm, mm,
are,
mm,
we know it exists in the Western world where people you know, find this beautiful spiritual teaching, and then they're all of a sudden like, oh, I can do that now.
mm, mm,
And like that's not the idea. The idea is again to just hold this great respect and great
mm,
reverence for where it comes from, but also take everything with a grain of salt.
yeah,
I think we're all humans, and especially like that's why we're here is to be human and
yeah,
to have errors and to learn from those errors. And I think also even hopefully the wisest of indigenous leaders will recognize that and tell you straight up to be like, you know, I'm interpreting from what I feel from the
yeah,
other worlds. You know, I'm interpreting as my human experience,
mm,
like
yeah,
the base of the Mayan spirituality is around the fire. The fire is a portal to the other realms, to the other worlds, and to the spirits. You know, to the ancestors. And like that needs to be held with great reverence from the
yeah,
humans that are working with it, and this connection to those realms is not, you know, I mean, I think, you know, in spirituality as well, we should know like spirits come from all different places, you know, like
mm,
ancestors come from all different places, you know, they themselves have biases and different things. And so I think
mm,
um again, taking everything with our
mm,
own, finding our own way to
yeah,
discern what is
yeah,
for us, what is real, what feels
mm,
right, what feels
yeah,
okay, and not just being like,
beautiful.
oh, because they said it has to be right. You know,
Yeah,
I think
mm,
like we're all still on this journey because we're still trying to learn what is best. You know, and I
yeah,
think we should absolutely hold that with great reverence of the people that have been holding that space for thousands of
yeah,
years, and also recognizing that they also are living from their own human experience and they're interpreting from their own human experience as well.
yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you so much for highlighting that. That discernment, I think, is something so important to speak to, which is why, you know, the topic on ceremonial grade cacao specifically, it's a beautiful heated topic at the moment that's coming out because it requires us all to be discerning of labels, just putting on that term and not necessarily being ceremonial and whatever that means in the first place, because that's not even um, uh, a monitored term. Yeah, I'm getting a
Yeah.
little off topic, but just to say about discernment, and I fully agree. It's just such an interesting time we live in that, of course, wisdom keepers over the generations where orally traditions and wisdom has been passed down, and there've been decades of initiation to become a wisdom keeper or a sharer of the knowledge. Um, of course, that holds a lot of weight, and we need to hold that with such respect and such reverence. But also seeing that our context is, again, the generalization of Westerners or a more modern culture, that we have been colonized to a degree as well. This is a certain system we live in. We separatists, we are individualists, and there's just this general lack of fulfillment, this kind of lost culture now, a ghost culture, as one of my teachers refers to here in Southern Africa. And we're searching for something that'll connect us back. And we're looking at indigenous cultures now and communities, people who live still connected to lineage or to land or to culture, that have spoken their language for thousands of years and who just have these traditions that run so far back. And so we're going and researching as Westerners now, but not to say that everything out there we need to just grasp and take for ourselves. That's also that kind of colonialist kind of attitude again of, oh, this is mine now. I've learned about it in a short course, or I've done this online, or I've joined this training in person. I've sat in a few ceremonies for a year or two at the foot of a shaman, and now this is my way. Because everything is going to be still through the lens of the subjective human experience. You know, no matter how wise that individual is and how many years they've lived on the planet as a wisdom keeper, recognized elder in their culture, they still, to a certain degree, are viewing things subjectively through their lenses. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. It's something we can go into in a part two. But thank you for sharing your views on this. If there's anything else that has come to mind, then I would love to hear it.
Um, yeah, I mean, it just really something that I've really been reflecting on, especially my time here in Tuqtuquilal, is like, well, for me personally, as a coming from a Western civilization to like living in Guatemala, I've gone through this journey of like, oh, like, what is my place here? Like, I want to be
Mhm.
a part of this. I want to learn from it. I have great respect from it. But clearly, I have a lot of unlearning to do, and relearning, and I'm constantly working through that. And I know it'll be a lifelong process, but I think that's really what this era is about. Right now is like this decolonization of our mindsets and learning to connect from our hearts, connect our minds and our hearts. I mean, I think there's this. The Condor Eagle prophecy of the Andean regions, and then also like with the Mayan changing calendar, it's just and very clearly um, to me is saying how the two ways of being, the two communities that were split from the beginning, I think also can be paralleled to the Bible, the story of Cain and Abel, where they were split into ways of agriculture, ways of being in society, one in which would go more into recognize more technology and more mindset, and ends up becoming like a power over nature,
Mm,
whereas like the other way is connecting to the heart, connecting with Mother Nature, learning to live in collective society, and and learning to be with nature. And I think that this time that we're in right now, it's not to hold it with shame and to bring any guilt to it. And that's something that I think that we, as from a Western society, really need to work through, is our guilt about it. But I think like um, getting past that aspect is a time where we just need to learn to have this respect for each other and learn from each other.
mm,
I think through Western cultures, if we can learn more from indigenous wisdoms about how to live with the earth, also recognizing that literally we're in different regions of the world generally, from where we're trying to learn these
mm,
teachings. I mean, I don't think everybody's going to live in the jungle, and that's where most of the Mayan culture comes from. Is how to
mm,
live in the jungle. So it's like, um, so it's just, yeah, again, learning to connect with our hearts, to
mm,
to to get out of our heads, get out of our mindset, but also like the indigenous communities, they're in a space where they're living in a globalized society,
yeah,
and they don't really have the technological advances that the rest of Western society has. And to be able to introduce these connections
mm,
again, like in this adapting time of climate change, where we need to learn like appropriate technologies, not things that will come and be extractivist, but really coming to teach different ways of working together, different ways of seeing the world, and where we can still have respect for theirs and they can have respect for ours, but we're not trying to change one another.
mm,
And I think that's
beautiful.
really what's beautiful about cacao to me, is like
Mm,
this is like just I feel like, wow, this is just like this is the time that cacao is getting out there in the world, because we need to learn to connect with our hearts. That's
mm,
ultimately what we need. Need to like we don't need to like be like, oh, have like absolutely need to live in an indigenous community or to live in
mm,
community necessarily. But if we work from our heart and we just live from our heart, like that in
mm,
itself will lead us to working more with nature and
yeah,
less like from this colonized aspect of like power
beautiful.
over nature.
Well, this yeah, is so beautifully, succinctly put. Thank you. And this seems like an appropriate time to just bring in the prophecy of cacao again. And there's a reason why you say why now is when there's just been this explosion over the last decade, I suppose we could say, of cacao not just being a confectionery and chocolate. That word cacao wasn't even known in, globally up until recently, and now the working with spiritually with cacao and connecting in ceremony and ritual, and it's just amazing how there's been such a escalation in, and one could say a fashion, I suppose, but there's nothing wrong with that because it puts cacao on the front pages of all the magazines and on the Instagrams and all of that. So people are exposed to it. And the prophecy that I just like to highlight is one that's been held by, as you know, by the Mayan culture for so long. And the prophecy of when the world has gone into chaos, or when the humans start to abuse and misuse the resources of Mother Nature, then cacao will walk out of the jungle and assist us back into harmony through our hearts. And it's just so appropriate nowadays. So through cacao and through the heart, we will be able to still live in our larger spaces, but we'll find our way back to connecting more with appreciating where our foods come from and sitting and creating ritual, feeding the spirit through that space and connecting like authentically with each other again and all the beings that we share this beautiful planet with. So, yeah, thank you, Robin.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Fran.
Yeah.
Lovely.
And I look forward to continuing on this conversation. But for now, just to say thank you so much for your time. And thank you to the land that you reside on there in Guatemala. Thank you to the land that I reside on here in South Africa. And again, just the beautiful bridge through the age that we live in of technology, that we're able to have this conversation across time zones. And it's Mama Cacao that has brought us together. So just great gratitude to this beautiful medicine. So
Yes,
thank
thank
you,
you so
sister.
much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lovely.